Hi everyone, welcome to this Microsoft Ignite session on CMMC. We have 4 great speakers with us today. Paul Meacham, who is a global black belt in US CMMC, Phil West, our US National Director in Modern Work and Security for CMMC, Catherine McSweeney, Product Marketing Manager for Microsoft Dynamics, and Wayne Mayer, our Director of Product Marketing for Cloud Adoption Lead in MSUS. So without further ado, let's get started to discuss how to start your CMMC compliance journey on the right foot with Microsoft. We have really 3 sections to this session, which we're first going to intro you to what is CMMC, how it is impacting businesses, and then head into a panel questions section where we will discuss CMMC compliance across Microsoft 365, Azure, Dynamics, and Power Platform. And we'll then tell you a little more about how to get started. Phil, do you want to tell us a little more about what is CMMC?
Sure. Thank you, Marion. So a lot of folks have asked about CMMC. You may have heard of the acronym, and it actually stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So obviously we've got words in there like cybersecurity, which is a buzzword that we're all dealing with. But we also have this term called maturity, and a maturity model and getting that certified is kind of the differentiating in how this is actually a program that was launched by the US DoD and looking at their supply chain. And there's really a common effect here is that there is something called controlled unclassified information. You'll hear this CUI term thrown around, or CUI. There's a ton of this intellectual property that either gets developed by, let's say, somebody in the Department of Defense or even somebody that's actually working as a contractor, and it gets exchanged back and forth. It could be, it could be diagrams, it could be blueprints, it could be models of how things operate, weather data, analysis tools. It could be a ton of stuff. The issue is that the Department of Defense contracts with a lot of our commercial customers. And what they're looking to do is to ensure that every link in the chain actually has a cybersecurity plan, a maturity model. And we're saying maturity model because this is a progressive thing. This is not just, hey, we're one and done. We did the checklist. We've actually had those situations before in the Department of Defense. And quite honestly, having self-attesting that, yes, I'm good, I'm following all the rules, that just hasn't cut the mustard. So the reason we're doing this is because cyber crime is actually costing trillions of dollars across the world. And the problem is, if you look at the intellectual property that goes into our Department of Defense projects, that's like the pinnacle of the amount of this controlled and classified information that is so crucial. And we need to do a couple things, not only securing it, but being able to track it and audit it and having control over, okay, if we're looking for a piece of information, who had access to that piece of information, who had access to those plans, or who was responsible for collecting this data, and how was that preserved in the chain of evidence, if you think about it, in terms of how it was being incorporated back into whichever DoD agency was actually controlling that project. So if we look at who really gets affected by this, it's literally anybody in that chain. So it's the Department of Defense. Let's just say it's the Air Force. They contract for a new program to develop a jet fighter, whatever it might be. You think about all the pieces of the puzzle that have to go into building a jet fighter. In many cases, you build facilities to house it. You build runways to test it. You build product to go into it. You've got metal, you've got rubber, you've got electronics, all the way down to somebody has to put the rivets in on the seat that holds the pilot in. Think about all those commercial entities that go into developing that. We call that the Defense Industrial Base, the DIB. And so you start thinking about this, that DIB community is now responsible for tons of information. And you can't just go and let them pinky swear and say, yes, I handled it properly. Yes, I did all the things I was supposed to do. You really have to have a model that says, not only we're going to hold you accountable for the cybersecurity posture, but we're also going to have this maturity capability, which means as we look at the level of exposure of the information, we have a a commensurate level of cybersecurity requirements. And so what's happening is the Department of Defense says, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to start ramping this out. We've already seen several dozen contracts come out with CMMC language listed in there, a maturity level being required on it. And again, there's levels 1 through 5. And we're not going to cover too much of that detail today, but what we will say is you can imagine 1 being very basic, 5 being like super genius cyber hygiene. We're really kind of hitting that maturity level 3 mark today. And what we're going to see is that's rolling out between now and 2025. All the contracts by 2025 will roll out with a specific designation. And in fact, if you think about it, as a project gets more complex, might have a higher maturity level. So we'll go to the next part of this. And one of the things I want to talk about is how do we get it managed? So we talk about cybersecurity, maturity, model, certification. So what's the certification piece? Well, there's an accreditation body. It's actually spun out of the Department of Defense acquisitions. It's an accreditation body that sits there and says, okay, these are the rules that we have to abide by. We inherited a lot of these rules from previous federal regulations, things like the Federal Acquisition Regulation, things like DFARS, a lot of the NIST standards, and we've conglomerated that into a checklist. And what's going to happen is we're going to look at these third-party auditors as going out and being able to test the individual customers, our customers, to see that they meet that maturity level of certification. Now, what happens is they go through these tests, and it's kind of a pass-fail. I mean, literally, it's like you don't get like a do-over. You either pass or fail. And one of the things that's really important is, as I mentioned before, this is a maturity scale, so it's not a one and done. Our customers are going to get certified, they're going to get audited, and then the timer starts. 3 more years, they come back and get re-audited. So this isn't like previous situations. And in fact, it's very different than what we've ever done before in government contracting, because typically it was, here's a contract, here's the requirement level, and if you won the contract, you had to go get certified. This is exactly opposite of that. You have to get ready, certified, and pass your audit before you can even bid on those contracts. This is why it's materially different now, and why we need to get a head start with our customers to kind of start talking about this. Now, we've talked a lot about DoD. Now, I will tell you this, we're seeing this outside of DoD as well. Department of Homeland Security, the GSA, we're seeing the executive orders out of the Biden administration talking about cybersecurity, about hygiene, about supply chains. So what we're going to talk about today is how does Microsoft come alongside of our customers, and how do we help them get equipped for this kind of a measure that they're actually facing? So we'll move forward now, and we'll talk about something called the shared responsibility model. Now, I will tell you this. You've probably seen this graphic before. This is kind of that, if you're thinking about the Azure world, if you're thinking about IaaS and PaaS and SaaS solutions, you've probably seen something like this. This is basically saying who owns what, who's responsible for what. You can see here, if you're on-prem, the customer is responsible for everything. Pretty obvious. IaaS solutions, this is you're running something in a virtual machine inside of Azure. You have an IaaS solution. There's certain things that you're responsible for. There's certain things that Microsoft steps up. Azure steps up and does certain things. The customer kind of has to start there and build on top of that. When you think about PaaS solutions or even SaaS solutions, all of a sudden now you can see Microsoft is providing a certain piece of this, but there's always a level where the customer has to come in and own from that level up. That's truly important here in CMMC, because this is not just, hey, Microsoft, sell me the CMMC thing. You know, how much does CMMC cost? There's no box that comes that says CMMC right now. The problem is every customer is different because every government contract is a little different. What I do for that contract is different. My level of exposure to information might be different. The level of contribution I make to the intellectual property might be different. So every customer is going to be a little different, but every customer has to take that level that starts wherever it's, whether it's IaaS or in this case, IaaS and SaaS, take where Microsoft stops and then they go above that. So they're responsible for the controls that are associated with this. And again, CMMC is built upon a number of underlying standards. So all of a sudden you've got these extra controls. For example, things like you must do multi-factor authentication. Something like that is inherent. It affects IaaS, it affects SaaS as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but again, this shared responsibility model is very crucial. This isn't something where Microsoft goes out and says, if you'll buy A, B, and C, you'll pass. You'll get your maturity level 3 audit cleared. We don't say that. We can't guarantee that. Again, this is a lot like us building a car. We build an automobile. We put safety features in the automobile. We put electronics in it. We put mechanism in there to measure how the engine is going. You know, there's problems, the dashboards. But what we do is when that vehicle goes on the lot and our customer purchases it, that customer is really responsible for the operation of the vehicle, utilizing it in a safe manner, having a driver's license, keeping the oil changed, and so forth. There's this shared responsibility model. There are things that we have to do to equip the customer and educate the customer and document it for the customer, but then it's up to the customer to drive from there on out. So let's move to the next piece where we're going to talk a little bit about what are the cloud solutions here. So in the Microsoft Cloud Solutions, we offer multitudes of ways that you can utilize cloud services. So in the Microsoft 365 world, for example, we have clouds for enterprise, for what we call our government community cloud, and the government community cloud higher level of certification. In Microsoft Azure, we offer instances where we have Azure Global, what we call Azure Commercial, and then we have Azure Government, which is a very finite sized organization, separate data centers, separate personnel, and it's built and classified, ready to run for government operations. Very similar in Dynamics and Power Platform. Similar, again, as a SaaS service to M365, you have a commercial offering. You have offerings in what we call the Government Community Cloud, GCC, and then you have GCC High. Again, we've highlighted here in red the preferred options that our customers have come back to us with. This is not Microsoft saying you have to choose the ones in red. There are instances here where if you have certain requirements, you're going to use the red options no matter what. ITAR is a good example of that. ITAR is guaranteed in these red environments. ITAR is International Traffic in Arms Regulations. It really means the old days where you built the tank and you wanted to make sure everybody that worked on the tank had a specific capability. And they were all U.S. citizens. They all had clearance or whatever the capability was. You had this sequestering of individuals. You may want to have that in your contract today. So there are ways in which you can actually determine what level of cloud offering meets your CMMC need. And now I want to turn it over to some other folks. We're going to go to another slide. It's going to give you some URLs, some ways that you can actually get information about, number one, what is the CMMC program? We have what we call an acceleration program, which actually encompasses all the tools that we're talking about here in a very descriptive link, as well as ways you can reach out. If you're internal to Microsoft, you can reach out to Ask CMMC. And also, if you have capabilities or questions and you are a customer or partner, you can come in and there are ways in which you can reach out to your account team as well as our SMB team. But I do want to ask things. So for example, we've got Paul Meacham here. So Paul, we've talked a little bit about today. So CMMC is, really about protecting this CUI stuff. I mean, that's really just like, I mentioned jet fighter, blueprints and diagrams. Isn't CUI just kind of really obvious stuff that we've talked about?
That's a great question, Phil. So controlled unclassified information is information that is government owned, it's or created. It's unclassified, so this is not secret or top secret information. And there are several different categories that are curated by the National Archives. So there's things like federal tax information, criminal justice information, defense information, NATO information, export controlled information, and several other categories. Now, not all of it is marked. And in fact, the U.S. government is going through a motion in order to standardize marking across its government agencies, because before the CUI rule was created, each agency marked its own data in its own purview. And so that flowed down to its contractors and such. So it is known that some contractors may be curating CUI that is not marked. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it is previously marked with the old markings such as FOUO or SBU or something like that. So if you don't know that you have CUI or not, one of the things you can do is you can navigate to dodcui.mil. It has some links there that talk about the policies. It talks about the executive order that established CUI in 2010. It talks about the DoD instructions 5200.48, which is how you would mark. It shows how CUI is supposed to be marked. And it gives you a link to the registry, which shows you the types of CUI that you have. Again, if you have any questions about whether you have CUI or not, then customers should ask their contracting agency, the agency that they are working for. So whether that is Department of the Treasury or the Department of Defense or Homeland Security, they should ask their contracting officers, whether they have CUI or not, and then they should look at this and see if they do have this type of information and whether it should be marked or not. It may not be 100% obvious, and I think that is what everyone is grappling with today, is that previously it was not marked. Going forward, it is supposed to be marked, and that different organizations and commercial entities are in various stages of marking it and identifying it.
Well, that's a lot of pieces and properties that a data could have. I can imagine that classification and labeling becomes really crucial. If a customer is out there and obviously they've got CUI information, they're part of a defense. A defense contract. Is there a way that a customer can get ready for a CMMC audit in the M365 world?
Absolutely. So M365 provides a robust capability to meet a number of the CMMC controls, and then when paired with things like Azure and the security tool sets that are in enterprise mobility and security, as well as additional services like financial and services and operations and others in Dynamics, that you have a not 100%, but maybe something like an 80% solution for many of the controls that are in CMMC. So when you start to round that out, as customers are looking for help, there are many partners that offer. These are Microsoft partners that offer help to go in as a pre-audit assessment. To look at your data. Maybe you're doing data mapping, maybe they're hardening the environment to set up the controls like you stated, setting up multi-factor authentication, setting up encryption, setting up logging and reviewing those logs and those type of things like that in order to be compliant. Now within Microsoft, there are a couple tools. Microsoft 365, of course, has compliance tools in there, things like Compliance Manager, which gives you a playbook on how to set up and configure in your environment, as well as guidance and things like Secure Score that shows you how you have devices managed, configured, and things like multi-factor authentication and role-based access enabled.
So like the Compliance Manager, will it tell me specifics about like CMMC level 3, or is it fairly generic?
So the Compliance Manager has a number of different templates. It's going to have CMMC maturity level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 templates. And then additionally, it's going to have templates for things like NIST 800-171, which is a brother of CMMC. That's where many of the controls are derived from. There are other templates for things like DFARS, as well as other standards like ISO, SOC, FedRAMP, and I think about 150 other assessment templates at this point.
That's amazing. So we've talked a little bit about M365. Now, obviously one of our companion products is we have a ton of work that's done in Azure. So, Wayne, I'm going to ask you, listen, I know, we've got Azure services, everything from obviously virtual machines to many different ways that we do Azure Defender for things like IoT, and we do secure DevOps. I mean, I can't imagine, like, how do we take advantage of everything that's in Azure, but still plan for CMMC, because there's just so many options.
Yeah, you have to kind of, we kind of use what we call the cloud adoption framework to help customers really identify kind of their adoption pattern and the way that they're going to move forward. And I think a lot of this kind of stems from building out that foundation and that platform in the most mature and in the correct way with the correct best practices. When you think about the structure that you have today, and how you manage environments and how you manage your subscriptions, and this is across both commercial and gov. If we have that well established and well stood up, we then are able to go and apply these various policy sets. Now, the beauty is that the team have actually already built out a CMMC level 3 policy initiative. This comprises of about, I think it's about 180 different individual policies that cover everything from access control, auditing, security, configuration management, recovery, risk assessment, you name it. There's a whole bunch of kind of policies that are built into that policy set. Now, you apply that into your environment, and that will then be able to enumerate through and kind of provide those controls and those guardrails. That compounded and added into things like Azure Security Center gives you then the ability to actually go and monitor compliance against that particular policy set. So I can actually, at a glance, go in and see which particular scope within my Azure environment, whether it be a management group, whether it be a subscription, is actually compliant to that particular set of policies that have been put in. So when you think about that shared responsibility model again, it's, hey, we're going to provide you with these sets, you control them, and then you're going to get the red and greens of, is the service kind of compliant? Have you locked it down, or is it open? And so you mentioned things like multi-factor authentication. If I don't have this applied, I don't have MFA kind of applied in my Azure environment, it's not going to start flagging me and saying, hey, you should be making sure that you apply and enable MFA. Secondly, things like, least privilege access on user accounts. You don't want to have user accounts of external users being able to access into your Azure environment with maybe a Hotmail, Outlook, or Gmail based account. And so those are kind of risks that we would then flag up and say, hey, you've got these exposures. The other really cool thing here is that you can now, at one single click, once you've got this applied, go and actually generate a compliance report. So you talk about those auditors coming in, click report gets generated. You can provide that PDF, which the auditor can take a look at and see where are your areas. Or more for yourself, you can make sure that you're green across the board before the auditor comes in. So really good ways of being able to get to those levels.
So similar to what Paul was saying, like, for example, in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Manager, you can actually have an Azure benchmarking tool that says, okay, I'm going to go out and look at, now will it look at things like CMMC level 3 and say, if you're prepping for that, these are your gaps, or is it specific, or is it like, because Paul was like, it was relatively specific. So is the Azure kind of similar to that?
It is specific, and we've got that built in as a built-in compliance set that is actually policies today that you can go in and say, I want CMMC level 3 and I want to apply this to my entire tenant, or I can apply it to parts of my Azure environment. So let's assume for a minute that all that data and all those services that are kind of DIB focused, you could then apply that as a kind of, as a policy set, and then you can report on that particular part of your Azure environment. And it will get very specific down to things like accounts and access from external resources and external environments. I'll go one step further. If you're new to Azure as somebody that's just starting on your journey, we've actually built out something called our enterprise scale or Azure landing zone. We've done all the mapping already that when you deploy an Azure landing zone using our reference architectures, they're Azure Security Benchmark aligned. That ASB alignment complies to CIS 7.1 and has and CMMC. And so if you build that from the outset, you already have these policies applied into your environment that you can now start to go and tweak and fine tune to make sure that you get to that high level.
Wow. Okay, so in our infrastructure, we can actually start out on the right foot, literally, by utilizing some of those predefined capabilities and prescribe that. So, we've talked about like infrastructure, we've talked about some of the productivity stuff. Catherine, I have to ask you, so the really cool stuff sometimes are things that are built on top of this other stuff. I'm thinking about things like, one of the things the devs keep coming back is, hey, I need a way to do like really lightweight apps. I don't, I'm not going to write an app that's thousands of lines of code. I need something that's relatively compact and tight. Maybe it's for a specific purpose. Maybe it's for mobile operation. It could be a number of things. Is there a way, like in Dynamics, and then Dynamics is this Mondo platform that has all these features. Is there something that the dev community could use to do things like quick coding, or what do you guys call it?
Oh, you mean the Power Platform, Phil,
Yeah.
if that's where you're getting at with the low code, no code. And I'm glad that you introduced us that way. And it was your words, not mine, that as important as modern workplace and Azure are as the foundation, some of the coolest stuff we can do really comes from the Power Platform and some of the Dynamics modules that we're offering to this customer base. So the Power Platform is the bread and butter of low code, no code. It allows you to do drag and drop for those who might be newer for the lightweight applications that you mentioned, where you don't need any code at all to make these apps run. So whether that's a mobile app, a desktop app, but something just to connect the dots between different data sources and getting that easy to use UX. But there's also, that's a no cliffs platform. So if you need to do something heavier, if there's going to be some complex work involved, the Power Platform allows you to do that as well. It really serves as just an empty canvas to get your applications built. And regardless of whether you're taking the low code approach or whether you're going to make, your fanciest app yet, the Power Platform has the tools in its toolkit to make that happen.
So, the slide before this, I said, there is a Dynamics 365 platform that sits inside of GCC High. So is that like CMMC ready? I mean, if we're thinking about all the requirements on CMMC in terms of the infrastructure we provided, so is that ready to go for our dev community to use?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dynamics 365 is, and one of our favorite parts about that is kind of that single use across the entire Microsoft platform. So it ties into your Azure Active Directory. So wherever your Azure Active Directory sits is where your Dynamics 365 will also sit. So if you're going to be in the Azure government space, then that's when you'll use the Dynamics 365 GCC High modules for your uses. Awesome.
Listen, Kevin, while I've got you on the meeting here, I've had customers come to me and ask for things like, cool applications, like what I consider like just-in-time technology, like remote assist, where you've got somebody that is sitting out at a location and for whatever reason they need real-time information. It's almost like, in this hybrid pandemic world, everybody's kind of working differently. Have you heard of this remote assist thing? I mean, is this like a platform play, or is that something else?
Absolutely. The remote assist stuff is so cool. Like, even I geek out over it and I work on it every day. And I think this is where the partnership with the government that Microsoft's established is super helpful, that we've worked with them to meet their needs, across the DoD, across some of the other agencies you listed prior, to make sure that this technology is available to them. We completely understand that not everyone can be in the same place at the same time, given different agency needs. And that also applies to the defense industrial bases that you mentioned. So we've got remote assist available for them. We've got different technologies that make it possible in the government community cloud high level that we talked about. So that way they can also accomplish their needs and they're not excluded from some of these technologies that have been created.
I got to ask you this. Is that what I see when I see like the remote assist with the HoloLens?
That's the one. That's the one. So we've got the HoloLens technology available, and there's also other uses for remote assist if the HoloLens is outside of your scope. But that HoloLens stuff that you're talking about is very cool, and I highly recommend everyone check it out. I'm
going to hit you up later, so hopefully you can give me a HoloLens to play with.
We'll see what we can do.
This has been great. So I appreciate everyone. I appreciate the time that went into this. As you can see, this is not just this is just a modern work thing. Or this is just an Azure thing. The CMMC community, the Defense Industrial Base, has a wide spectrum of needs. If you think about it, they have some very specialized needs. They have some very crucial requirements for security and privacy and identity management. And if you think about it even from things like, DevOps on the Azure platform, securing that, things like GitHub and capabilities that they can leverage. I mean, Microsoft actually has a solution that spans all of these. We're not just in there competing with, Teams and Word and Excel. We're talking about security, compliance. We're talking about Azure infrastructure. We're talking about Defender on Azure that talks to so much of the infrastructure that's out there in the cloud and how we secure it, how we manage it, capabilities that we are in terms of also looking into other cloud platforms and being able to inspect so that when we look at a customer, we can say, hey, not only can we help you with your Microsoft estate, we actually have tools that can reach outside of Microsoft and help with that visibility. So this has been an awesome time. I've actually learned a lot here. So I thank everybody. Marion, do you want to close us out with a parting remark?
Thank you, Phil, and thank you all. Really appreciate the discussion here. Yeah, to get started and to close out this session, please feel free to check out the CMMC Acceleration Program updates. That's a place where we keep all of the tools that you can use to get started on CMMC compliance. So very useful link for you to keep and to go to. Again, we have the email address. That's a good place for our Microsoft employees to reach out, ask questions as they help and support their customers. And for our customers, we have, of course, your account team that can support you in your CMMC journey. Or if you're not managed, feel free to reach out to the SMB team, cmcsmb@microsoft.com, who can answer your question and help you get on your way with your CMMC compliance journey. We are super excited to support you in this adventure, and as you can see, we have quite a range of tools to do so. So looking forward to work with you on that.